Thanks for joining. My name is Caitlin Ear. I am the Global Communications Manager here at ACT, the App Association. We are super excited to join you for today's conversation and honored to open it up with some opening remarks from ACT, the App Association President, Morgan Reed.
Hi, I'm Morgan Reed, President of ACT, the App Association. I'm excited to join you as we highlight innovations in the accessibility tech space and the impact of legislation and regulation here in DC. In the age of rapid technological advancements, it's truly heartening to witness a surge of innovation geared towards creating tools that cater to the unique needs of individuals with disabilities. These aren't just devices or software, they are bridges to opportunities, gateways to experiences, and testimonies to the profound impact technology can have when guided by compassion and inclusivity. The kinds of technologies that we're talking about today are an embodiment of empathy in action. From voice assistants that narrate the world for the visually impaired, to wearable devices that help those with mobility challenges navigate their environments more easily. These innovations are rewriting narratives, allowing dreams to flourish and potentials to be fully realized. We also recognize the crucial role of government policies in shaping the landscape of accessibility tech. Thoughtful, inclusive policies have the power to ensure that these tools aren't just limited to labs or demos, but they reach the hands and homes of those who need them most. Through fostering environments that champion innovation while safeguarding user rights, our members amplify the impact of these technologies 100-fold. But let's remember that this is a journey. While propelled by technology, it's ultimately powered by human stories. It's the story of a deaf student who can now participate in class discussions thanks to instantaneous transcription apps. It's the tale of a traveler who uses a wheelchair confidently when exploring new cities, guided by accessible route planners. And it's the chronicle of countless individuals reclaiming independence, dignity, and joy. As we delve into the intersection of accessibility tech and policy today, let's constantly remind ourselves of the larger goal, a world where technology doesn't just connect devices, but connects hearts and minds. A world where empathy isn't a sentiment, but an engine driving progress for all. Thank you for joining today's discussion, and we look forward to many more.
Awesome. Well, as Morgan said, we are extremely excited to have this conversation today and excited for many more. So without further ado, I'm going to be doing a brief intro of our panelists. First up is Betsy. Betsy Furler is the founder and CEO of App Association member company For All Abilities. Betsy has an impressive history in the accessibility tech space and has written several books on the use of tech and apps for speech therapy and for people with disabilities. We also have Brian Scarpelli. He is the Senior Global Policy Counsel here at ACT, the App Association. And while Brian works on a slew of issues here, his expertise today is his passion for accessibility tech and a deep understanding of tech policy. Brian uses his intersection of knowledge to help small to medium-sized companies and the people who are attempting to regulate them better understand how looming rules and regulations can help or hinder accessibility tech innovations. So now that intros are out of the way, Brian, I'm throwing it to you to kick us off.
Look at that. Look what I did. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Really appreciate it. And yeah, it's great to be here with you, Betsy. Really couldn't be more timely. This discussion we're having could not be more timely. I think as you heard from Morgan's remarks earlier and some of what Caitlin was saying, the technologies that we're involved with are really at the cutting edge here of making immense differences across in providing accessibility, equivalent experiences for a increasing number of disabilities. It's just very exciting to be involved in the space, and our intent here today is to give you folks a little bit of an understanding of how we see the state of accessibility right now, and then to provide some updates for you on how law and policy is addressing accessibility today and where things might be going, and then something of a call to action for you, because as you'll hear, they're really it's critical right now that our community that really is driving so much innovation across the Internet of Things, really, consumer and enterprise contexts, it makes its voice heard and is involved as these very impactful policies are going to be shaped. We'll talk about some of that, but why don't we just and initially, I think it would be really, really great, Betsy, if I could just ask you kind of open-endedly here, how you see the landscape of accessibility technology right now.
Well, thanks, Brian. It's so great to be here. And I'm passionate about accessibility related issues, especially around technology. I think that the landscape around that has grown to include so much. So originally, accessibility around tech was very focused on screen-based systems as what we traditionally had, and also more of what I call traditional disabilities, so hearing, vision, mobility. We now know that cognitive accessibility is probably one of the most important things to take into account, because we all have different cognitive abilities throughout our lives, our years, our months, our weeks, even our days, whether it's something that we were born with or something that we've acquired due to aging or another disease process, or something like post-COVID that causes us to hopefully have a cognitive difference for a short period of time. It can even be something like having a baby and not getting enough sleep, or having too much alcohol or not enough coffee. So we all change from moment to moment, really, with our cognitive abilities and our cognitive accessibilities. So that is really coming to light in these days now. WCAG is now addressing cognitive accessibility for the first time. We're also thinking about how are other devices accessible that maybe they don't have a screen. And so our traditional accessibility methods aren't useful in that state. I think the other thing around accessibility that's really important is really thinking of it as it's the right thing to do, of course, but it's also a great business opportunity for companies to reach all of their customers instead of just part of their customers. And of course, we're going to talk about the regulation around it today. I came into this from a background in speech therapy. I've been a speech pathologist for many years and have had the privilege of working with people of all ages and all abilities. And our technology now has changed the lives of so many people with disabilities. And I hope we continue on this accessibility path to just increase that and reach more and more and enhance everyone's lives.
Great. Yeah, I would only maybe add on that a little bit, a little bit from where I sit. I guess I find it. I remain as encouraged as I was, 5 years ago or so, seeing almost exponential capabilities being unlocked. And to add a little bit of a personal touch to it, my wife is a special education teacher, and this is actually something of a testament. I know that this is not the only example where a accessibility feature ended up benefiting a much wider community and people with other disabilities, including cognitive. But in her job, it became really apparent after the iPad was debuted that its text-to-speech functionality was very beneficial to nonverbal autistic children. And I don't believe, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't believe that was the primary intent of the text-to-speech functionality when it was incorporated into the iPad originally. And it's just an example about how some of this innovation can occur.
Yes, both text to speech and speech to text are so valuable for everyone. In fact, I often recommend text to speech for people who may have mental health challenges or other issues where typically they're very verbal and able to communicate, but they may have times when they can't. Or even as simple as someone losing their voice. There's a woman who I know, she now calls me her speech pathologist. She is an opera singer and had some vocal nodules and had to have vocal rest for a while and couldn't use her voice. And that's a perfect opportunity to use that for someone who typically does not consider themselves to have a disability.
Yeah, a critical point. And, I know that the statistic fluctuates a little bit every year, but, there's a United Nations statistic, I think, which estimates, you might have to check me on this, Betsy, what percentage of the entire global population has a disability at any given time. And it's, if it's not something you think about, you might be surprised that it can be half, if I recall correctly.
It's
and that includes aging people whose hearing is going and things like that, correct?
It's typically thought to be about 20%, but however, what we have found at For All Abilities through our data collection is 50% of people report having some type of condition that could qualify for them to be covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I think that the data has just not caught up with our society with mental health issues. We used to not consider a mental health issue to be a disability. Even cognitive changes would not be considered a disability. So it does, I believe that you're correct. It does affect about half of the population of the world, of the US, and probably maybe even more impactful in other parts of the world where medical care with aging is less available.
Right. Absolutely. So before leaving just kind of this kind of opening theme that we have, Betsy, I was curious if you had any thoughts just kind of about, look, you can't go an hour or two, right, without talking about AI.
Right.
It's not hyperbole, in my view, to say that, to say that, that automated tools, even basic kind of back-end administrative type tools that use automation and are AI, as well as more advanced tools being developed, seem to be really making leaps and bounds right now in providing new accessibility features across a range of modalities. Do you see that too? Absolutely.
In fact, I might take this opportunity to tell everyone a little bit about For All Abilities tool. We at For All Abilities, I started this company as a consulting company on workplace disability and accessibility issues, and discovered the problem was so big that I felt like it needed to be addressed in a different way, and came up with a self-assessment that employees can take, and they self-assess their strengths, needs, and preferences at work. And then they're able to get a report that uses AI and puts my brain and how I think about things into an automated report that then gives every employee, whether they have a diagnosis of a disability or even consider themselves disabled, actionable steps that they can take to be more productive and efficient at work. This is a little bit how it looks. Of course, we have consents. We look at what type of computer they use at work, what their role is in their position, at their employer. Things about how do you have trouble with time management on large multi-step projects? Many people, around 70% of our users, have said yes to this question. It's huge impact. Do you struggle organizing your time? How do you prefer learning something new? What time of day is the most productive? They quickly can go through all of these questions. They get an automated report through the power of AI that gives them recommendations and then tells them what their strengths and preferences are, because sometimes we all need reminders of that. This brings basically accommodations, or what we call supports, because the person may or may not have a disability and they may or may not disclose, to everybody in the workplace. Employees are more efficient and productive when they can work to their strengths. And in the past, maybe 1% of people got ADA accommodations at work. So we can bring that really through the power of AI. And then the employer gets aggregated de-identified data about all of their employees and how all of their employees work and think and learn. Things like this: 32% of people from this company worked better with video or learned better with video. However, they didn't have any of their trainings on video at the time. Gives them information about how, have their employees had a significant life change in the past 12 months that highly impacts how someone works. Are you easily distracted at work? This employer, 74%. This is what we're seeing. Most people are highly distracted at work. They can think about their work. The employer can think about the work environment. Here's a screenshot of the amount of the prevalence of different disorders out in the workplace. It's shocking numbers, really. And we also give them information on if they have employees with celiac or nut allergies, so they can accommodate to them. And that's all because of AI. We are seeing so much advancement with AI. I would say the other thing that made a huge impact is kind of old now, but touchscreens also made a huge difference in the world of accessibility in general, through special ed, speech therapy, as well as everybody around throughout their lives. My mom has macular degeneration and she's 88. And when I had to get her a new computer about a year ago, and I got her a large monitor that's a touchscreen, and it's made a huge difference in her ability to access the internet. So important for us to be able to do that.
Mhm.
So AI is so important. It's going to be so valuable. I'm so excited about seeing what happens in the future.
And, maybe the only other thing that occurs to me to maybe bring up before we move on maybe to our next little topic is, just to expand on a point that I think you made earlier, which is that many accessibility features are more widely beneficial. For example, with AI, right? Voice capabilities on a device in the home, such as turning on the lights, that some kind of things like that,
It's huge. I mean, there are people who now have control over their environment. Right before we started this, I turned my AC down from my phone. And there are many people who didn't have the physical ability to do those kind of things before, but it's also really handy for all the rest of us to have access to that as well. There's also, on the AI front, there's also a company out there named Care Validate, and they have a great accommodations product that helps use AI to allow more access to Ask Jan, which is the government job accommodations network information. So they're using AI so people can access that via voice.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thanks.
Yeah. Well, Brian, similarly, what's the state of accessibility tech regulation currently?
Right. Well, thanks. Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little fluid right now, but I think that there is some pretty good info we can give people. I have a slide deck.
Yeah, and things have changed so much since tech regulation and accessibility regulation has been updated. So there's a lot to dig into there.
Yeah. So let me see here. This should work. Hopefully you're seeing just the slides.
Yes.
I think you are. Okay, great. Yeah, absolutely. I think before we turn to the regulation, because, this is what lawyers do, right? It's really important that we just get some key terminology. We're all of us here are on the same page here with key terminology. And so, just for our purposes here, when we're talking about regulation of technology for purposes of disability access, we mean accessibility to be the ability of an end user to use, that is, equally perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the product or service with the equivalent functionality as to somebody who would not have the disability. And, there's maybe some subcomponents here that you might think about as a developer, for example. Usability, user interface, user experience. And separately, the concept of of inclusion. And one of the things that certainly we endorse and we try to advance across a whole bunch of different ways. And you hear these people say security by design or privacy by design. Inclusivity by design is such an important concept as you're developing a product. Thinking about inclusivity and disability access from the beginning design phases.
That I'm so glad you brought that up, Brian, because that is one of my soapboxes. It's so easy to build accessibility in and inclusivity in when you do that, when you start thinking about that from the beginning of a product.
Yeah, and to tack it on later or to go back and revisit code, and those, as people will know, those, if you're that's expensive and onerous, it can break a product and things like that. So that's just something that I thought maybe we put out there first. And some of this you covered, Betsy, but I just thought, again, when we're thinking about regulation in kind of the broader context, why prioritize accessibility? Yeah. First, I think that there's certain, and first and foremost, really it's the right thing to do. I think that there's a moral imperative here for inclusivity, and I feel really confident in saying that every ACT, the App Association member, probably shares that sentiment, and I hope everybody watching this does too. But also market demands and shifting demographics. We've already touched on how functionalities built in, perhaps intended to benefit one or more disabilities, can end up actually being a convenience or market differentiator in that same product for people who might not at that time have the disability that feature was targeted to benefit. And also, don't forget, that no secret, right? That there's an aging generation in the United States, and as people age, sight degrades, hearing degrades, and those sorts of things. So people will increasingly need help. There's also language barriers, other things not that language is not a disability, but there's all kinds of shifting demographics that are worth considering here. I mentioned increased digitization, and this really links back to, again, something that you sort of brought up there, Betsy, which was the pandemic. In a way, I'm not looking for a silver lining in a pandemic, but I think objectively, I think we can look back now after years and see how technology was leveraged rapidly to address various health-related concerns, social distancing, et cetera. And to give you an example, like much greater support and with eased restrictions was provided for Medicare beneficiaries to use technology to interact with their doctor, whether it be a live voice video call or collecting data and asynchronously transmitting it. And yeah.
I just wanted to kind of connect that increased digitalization and the shifting demographics. So as our society ages, as well as becomes more globally diverse and culturally diverse, accessibility affects all of that, whether someone identifies as having a disability or not. Language, difference in languages, difference in culture, and aging, the results of aging can sometimes prohibit people from using tools that accessibility will allow them to use.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, of course, these were just a little bit of kind of providing a broader context of reasons for accessibility, because of course, this fourth box on the right that you see says compliance with laws and regulations. And that's what I was looking to address here. But the point here, I think, was just to provide some context in that this is about way more than just complying with the letter of the law. And I can tell you anecdotally from dealing with members from all different walks in all different kinds of sectors and business models, that they drastically exceed the bare minimum requirements of accessibility in a relevant law. And they do it because primarily what's in the first box, that it's the right thing to do, but also for the, some of the being responsive to the market. And frankly, it's poor business practices to exclude people from disabilities from using your product, right? But compliance with the law is also important, and it does shape. It does provide, I think of it as a floor, not a ceiling, and it does shape what we think of as accessibility and what we do to ensure accessibility. So, there's a number of ways that you as a developer may find yourself needing to comply with a law or regulation. These are a few. I hope that they will make sense as I go across some of these important relevant laws, because this might seem a little random to you if you look at this list without a dotted line being drawn to a section in a certain law or something like that. But, if you're an extension of a physical store location, it can only be accessed via the web. If you're a contractor of the federal government or a state government or used by federal employees, or if you offer what's known as advanced communication services, which we'll share in a later slide exactly what those are, you may need to address FCC, Federal Communications Commission requirements. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, I think everybody is hopefully aware of the law. It is, I think it's over 25 years old now. Its age has prompted serious discussions about new laws and whether new laws are needed. Because it essentially comes down to reasonable modifications. And Betsy, you mentioned WCAG, and actually it'd be great. You know what? It might be helpful to some people out there who aren't fully familiar if you maybe describe a little bit about what WCAG is and who develops it.
Yeah, so WCAG is about web accessibility and how websites basically are built, and the accessibility features around that. It's regular, I guess regulated, I think is the wrong word, designed and controlled by the World Wide Web Consortium. And WCAG looks at, again, accessibility of web-related products. And now cognitive accessibility is included in that as well.
Right. So it's a third-party, non-governmental standard development organization, I believe, called the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, who develops it. You're right. And I just say that to elaborate on an important point you're making. WCAG itself is not a regulation, though some of these regulations do lean on WCAG as a means of compliance. I suppose
guideline is a
guidelines. Yeah.
Better term. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I think when it comes to the ADA, it's been interesting over time to look at at how the case law has developed here. And I'm not going to go too deep down into the weeds here and read court decisions or share a text of court decisions with you. But it does, some time ago, basically, a federal court determined that, by and large, if a mobile app is not an extension of a physical storefront, then it's not subject to the ADA. Did Congress intend that restriction? Well, that's an interesting question, right? And a lot of people debate that, but nonetheless, that's kind of been a precedent set in the courts, right? There's been some significant cases as recently as 2018 about website accessibility under the ADA. One that I would just mention was involve Domino's Pizza. Think about that, right? An app. They have physical storefront. That's where they make the pizza and you pick it up, right? Where a federal court issued a decision addressing website and mobile application accessibility for visually impaired and other disabled individuals under the ADA, where they in addressing the complaint, they said that Domino's did violate the ADA due to a plaintiff's inability to order a customized pizza using a screen reader software, and that they issued a permanent injunction, meaning that's a action. The court is forcing action to make that for Domino's to bring their website and mobile apps into compliance with WCAG in order to comply. So that just illustrates, I hope, to you some of the activity in the federal courts. There's also some guidelines that the Department of Justice sets under the Americans with Disabilities Act. EIT, right? Who says electronic and information technology anymore? Maybe that's how old these regulations basically are that the DOJ maintains. They're over 25 years old. They haven't been updated. There's not even a proposal to update them. In a way, they're probably practically irrelevant, aren't they then? But nonetheless, they could be updated. And if they are, that would be extremely impactful. And I think we'd all be looking around and wondering whether we should have been proactive as a community more so than we had been in advance of, that in a way that could shape proposals for such requirements. So these are just important angles to briefly touch on here with the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's also Section 508 and Section 255. I've included information on what these two laws are. They essentially apply to federal agencies themselves. Section 508 does, and Section 255, really is not. These are again regulations pointing to WCAG for compliance. I think it is in a practical is maybe the practical takeaway here, but these are quite unlikely to touch a third party developer. The last and this was one that in that list of 4 up front that we mentioned, the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, the CVAA, and it's Advanced Communication Services. So this is the Federal Communications Commission, an independent federal agency that was some time ago now given authority by Congress to improve accessibility in the communications sector. And they have this definition of advanced communication services. It's 4 things, which you can see listed here: interconnected voice over IP, non-interconnected voice over IP. What is interconnected and non-interconnected? That means does the service touch the public switch telephone network, the PSTN? So they've included both interconnected and non-interconnected within the scope of this rule. There's also requirements for broadcasters on video programming. There's limited applicability, frankly, to third-party developers. I will say though, not all developers. It's something to always be cognizant of. To give you an example, if you have developed a native app, like one that is included basically at the point of sale to a consumer, then you likely would see some liability. You would be subject to this rule in a number of ways that you otherwise would not. So there is some applicability, but the primary focus here is on sort of kind of core communications services, not necessarily things like a game on the network edge or something like that. So that kind of brings us to a new proposal that we're looking at now. You've heard a little bit, gotten a little bit of information from us already about long-standing rules and the struggles by regulators and courts to see how, if so, how they apply to modern and emerging technologies. Great example is talking about that Domino's case that I mentioned, Domino's Pizza case, and the applicability of quarter-century-old law to new and emerging technologies, like a basic mobile app, and relevant. Everything's relative, I suppose, but that's pretty not so. I think it's safe to say that mobile phones and mobile apps were probably not something that were really contemplated at the time when the ADA was put into place, right? So there's some high interest from some members of the legislature, Senator Markey, Representative Eshoo, to advance some new legislation on disability access. Now, many of the provisions that they're proposing in this new bill, the Communications, Video, and Technology Accessibility Act, CVTA, are responsive in their view. They're responsive to gaps in the existing CVAA based, and now whether those are gaps or not is not actually something that with respect to closed captioning, with respect to video playback, with respect to certain further communication services, that's not something I'm going to opine on here, whether there actually is a gap or not. But in the view of some, and in these offices, there is clearly, because they have put this provision out here. The part I'd like to maybe draw your attention to is a section on emerging technology. And, this is, the proposal includes basically a periodic report to Congress from the U.S. Access Board, which is the part of the government that oversees the federal procurement and federal agency policy, like organizational policy for accessibility, including for ICT, to provide, to make evaluations about the state of accessibility for various emerging technology modalities. And it's really something, it's a signal, I think, right? That that new modalities and accessibility to them is something that Congress takes seriously. The agencies already take it seriously. And we should all take it seriously. I know most of us do, but our bandwidths get constrained, and resources too. So it's just something that I think is really important to mention here, and to tie back even to you, Betsy. There's discussion in this rule about, and reporting for emerging technology accessibility is specifically called out for those with cognitive disabilities. So
that's exciting to see that. I was also going to ask you, how would the product similar to mine be affected or regulated under this new emerging legislation?
Well, as far as I don't think you'd be affected, at least too deeply, by closed captioning requirements.
Right.
There's, for example, some of these, the video playback communication services. A lot of this relates to a differentiation in the law between video that has aired, that has been aired by a network and then is later being replayed, versus video that has not, like something on a leading streaming service has not been played on a network, has not been played on network TV or over-the-air television. And there's uncertainty as to whether the same requirements would apply to captioning, and accessibility requirements would apply to the content delivered via the streaming service. Now, it's probably a fair point to say that the difference may, in that case, be almost academic. You could argue, because there's very strong accessibility features on every leading service that you see, and I think that speaks to, I think, the broader motivations and the exceeding of legal requirements that we see broadly, across our membership and on other platforms that we rely on, and streaming services and things like that.
I think that also kind of goes back to the idea of it's also good business.
Yeah.
Yeah, accessibility is good business.
It is. Yeah. So, it remains to be seen, how this legislation will evolve. There is an ongoing effort to take in feedback on it and curate it, that the App Association is a part of. And we'd love to hear from you all about, even hyper detailed, you all out there in TV land watching this, even if it's very granular or detailed input about how the WCAG standard's being used, or whether specific requirements that are being imposed in an existing regulation or law actually are feasible or not, and questions like that. So this is kind of we're taking in the feedback right now to fully understand that.
And we had talked a couple of weeks ago, Brian, about standards out there, best practices. And I know before I started For All Abilities, I did some consulting with app developers and on helping them make their products more accessible. And we had talked, as I said, a couple of weeks ago, about the possibility of maybe developing a set of best practices for developers to be able to follow. Would you like to?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something
on that.
Yeah, that's something that we're continuing to develop on, and we would really love to hear about interest or feedback or advice about how such a set of best practices could help. The idea that new legislation would be addressing emerging technology and accessibility poses the quandary for the developers of those technology features that, we know that, it's not controversial to say that the law and regulation has great difficulty keeping up with advancements in the market. So proactivity and proactive education and recommendations, I think, from our community on how we already address disability access in various emerging technology modalities, and recommendations should there be some new policy changes or new policy put in place on how that new policy can align with the practices we already have developed and continue to try and perfect. I know that's an aspirational goal, probably never going to be perfect, and never really ever going to fully achieve accessibility, frankly, right? I mean, I think that's something that all of us, America, we're always going to be striving for. Is
absolutely right. It's something, one, the target keeps changing, and then they're just everybody thinks and learns and works differently.
Absolutely. So, it's not, the fact that this legislation has been introduced is very significant. It's not necessarily going to pass tomorrow either. I mean, that's the realist. That's realism. But I think it is a great prompt for all of us to come together as a community and see if there is a willingness, perhaps, to find some common threads about accessibility goals and how we might achieve those goals. And that's sort of where we're at right now with it. I guess I end my spiel with like a call to interest. I'm really excited about this possibility. I urge ACT members to reach out with any interest and stay tuned for more updates. But this is something that I think would be a great service to anybody impacted by disability access policies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, I want to be mindful of time. I see that we have a question. I can read this out for folks. This is for both Betsy and Brian. How do you think that these kinds of laws and regulations influence the accessibility space and innovation within it?
Well, I think it's important because we all are kind of guided by federal regulation, and so I think just the fact that something may be moving forward that shows the importance of this area and the value of accessibility of all sorts of tech products. And I think, like we were saying earlier, it's a constantly moving target, and with technology emerging so quickly and changing so quickly, I think a lot of the value is in showing the importance of the work.
Yeah, I fully agree with you there, and I think, like it or not, these government policies are immensely impactful. I think I said earlier, I think of them as providing a floor. It's like kind of a bare minimum, because I say that confidently because I'm always so heartened when I talk to various members from all over the country and all different lines of business and all different kinds of customer bases about their proactive commitment to accessibility by design, regardless of what the bare minimum required under a relevant law or regulation is. But nonetheless, that floor is the floor we're standing on. So it's very impactful. And there's always a risk, there's always a risk when a new policy proposal is put forward or potentially even advances and is finalized, that unintentionally some new legal requirements will close off the door to the next great innovation in accessibility technology. And it's the last thing that I think the policy maker wants to do, whether that's Congress or an agency or both, or an organization even who's setting policy. But it does happen. And it's because it's very difficult to craft laws and regulations that are future proof. And I don't think anybody in the world has yet figured out that formula. So when you see opportunities like this, when you start to see the beginning of a groundswell within, for example, Congress to address emerging technology and accessibility, it may be, you might be able to say now is now the time for us to be proactive and be forthright about the ins and outs that we see and the difficulties that we might have under existing requirements, but how new requirements should be. We should do our best to guarantee that new requirements don't close the door to some new unexpected development, something that we can't predict that will drastically improve accessibility.
Absolutely.
I think we have time for one more question before y'all leave us with some final thoughts. So this question says, Brian, is there a chance of the CVTA passing this year, and when could it be enforced?
I would say it is probably highly unlikely that it passes this year. I suppose wilder things have happened, and don't ever gamble on Congress doing or not doing something, but the odds seem quite low at this moment that the CVTA would advance and pass and be signed into law within this year. That's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for all of us, I think, to, as we see necessary, interact with the lead, the members' offices who are leading in the development of it, and to ensure that it strikes a good balance between leaving that flexibility to innovate while also serving providing greater accessibility as the goal of the legislation is to those with disabilities.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, Brian and Betsy, I want to give you guys a chance to leave us with some final thoughts before we sign off and say our thank yous.
Well, I think all of this is so exciting. It's really exciting to me as someone who's been in accessibility for quite a while to see the changes, the way that emerging technology is being used to enhance the lives of people with disabilities as well as everyone else. I think we need to do more data collection and around the impact and benefits of accessibility, both to the disabled population as well as to the population in the whole. And also really, as we continue to think about accessibility, thinking about it for, like we said earlier, smart home technology, gaming, all sorts of technology that isn't on screens. I'm also very excited, of course, about the impact that AI is going to have on this industry. And thanks for having me. It was a great discussion.
Thanks. Yeah, for me, I too am extremely optimistic. I think that the tech, we just continue to see across, and I mean this far past disability access as well, but it's so exciting to be part of an industry where the tools and services being developed, this technology really is this incredible platform for empowerment and addressing inequities, and that's absolutely true for disability access, but also in so many other contexts. So, the energy that we have, that we just continue to see from, in the innovation that we continue to see from the small business segment of the technology sector is very exciting, and there's so many opportunities to, for us to support you as an association, and that's our goal. Whether it's through advocacy on a bill like the CVTA, specific regulation at a federal agency, or even regulation by a state government or local government, we'd love to help and love to learn how we can help. So please do reach out. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have to echo what Brian said. Please reach out if you have any questions. Thanks everyone for joining. You're going to be able to find a recorded version of this on our YouTube channel, as well as the audio and a transcript published via our Tech Swamp podcast. And again, thanks for joining, and we'll be chatting with y'all soon.
Thanks.